There's three things that divide women and men most particularly from the psychometric perspective. One is that women are more agreeable than men. And so that seems to be the primary maternal dimension as far as I can tell. It's associated with a desire to avoid conflict, but it's associated with interpersonal closeness, compassion, politeness. Women are reliably higher than men, especially in the Scandinavian countries and in the countries where egalitarianism has progressed the farthest. So that's where the difference is maximized, which is one of the things James Damore pointed out quite correctly in his infamous Google memo. Okay, women are higher in negative emotion, so that's anxiety and emotional pain. That difference is approximately the same size. And again, that maximizes in egalitarian societies, which is extremely interesting. And then the biggest difference is the difference in interest between people and things. And so women are more interested in people and men are more interested in things, which goes along quite nicely with your car anecdote. But the thing about men interacting with men, again, is that it isn't that they respect each other's viewpoints. That's not exactly right. What happens with a man, and I know a lot of men that I would regard as remarkably tough people for one reason or another, and everything you do with them is a form of combat. Like if you want your viewpoint taken seriously, often you have to yell them down, and like they're not going to stop talking unless you start talking over them, you know. And it's not like men are automatically giving respect to other men, because that just doesn't happen. It's that the combat is there and it's expected. And one of the problems, and so this is part of the reason why I think men are bailing out of so much of academia and maybe the academic world in general, and maybe the world in general, is that men actually don't have any idea how to compete with women. Because the problem is that if you unleash yourself completely, then you're an absolute bully. And there's no doubt about that, because if men unleash themselves on other men, that can be pretty goddamn brutal, especially for the men that are really tough. And so that just doesn't happen with women ever. But so you can't unleash yourself completely. If you win, you're a bully. If you lose, well, you're just bloody pathetic. So how the hell are you supposed to play a game like that? You know, so I've worked with lots of women in law firms in Canada, for example, and high achieving women, like really remarkable people, I would say. And they're often nonplussed, I would say, by the attitude of the men in the law firm, because they would like to see everyone pulling together because they're all part of the same team. Whereas the men are like at each other's throats in a cooperative way, because they want the law firm to succeed, but they want to be the person who's at the top of the success hierarchy, right? So, and that doesn't jive well with the more competitive or cooperative ethos that's part and parcel of agreeableness. And so we don't really have any idea how to integrate male and female dominance hierarchies.
Exactly. That's exactly right. This is why I love this show, you know, Real Housewives, which Boris Adam scorns. And just last night, okay, I was watching an episode, right, where the women were at each other, okay, at a party and recounting. But I said this to you, but you said this to me, and the men got together there and said, well, this is the way they communicate, you know, with each other, and men, we men, okay, just will have a fist fight, and 10 minutes later we're going to have a beer at the bar next to each other, and so on. And I have observed that my entire
my daughter used to be really irritated about that, because she like most people was the target of feminine conspiratorial bullying at one. She's no pushover, my daughter, so it wasn't like this was a continual thing or that she didn't know what to do about it, but she had observed these girls conspiring against her and then blackening her name on Facebook, which is part and parcel of the typical female bullying routine, which is often reputation demolition, right? That there's a good literature on that. And then she'd watch what would happen if my brother or my son would have a dispute with his friends, you know, and maybe they were drinking and there was a dispute. They'd have a fight, and then the next day they were friends again. And that's another thing that's strange, is that like men have a way of bringing a conflict to a head and resolving it, right? And that it isn't obvious to me that women have that same, perhaps you might call it a luxury, but it's also the case that men don't know what to do when they get into a conflict with a woman, because what the hell are you supposed to do, you know? Mostly what you're supposed to do is avoid it.
And you were talking about the plight of young men and how guys really need to get their act together. You went on to say the lack of an identifiable and compelling path forward and the denialism these kids are being fed on a daily basis and undoubtedly destroying them, and that is especially true of the young men. This show we've covered widely the fact that suicide is the biggest killer of young men under the age of 45 in this country. It goes on in that interview to say, at this point, to my astonishment, Peterson begins to weep.
Yeah, well, it says, see, now it did it to me again. Look, last night, I was at this talk I gave, and about 1,000 people came, and about 500 of them stayed afterwards, and most of them were young men, and just one of them after the other comes up to me, and they shake my hand, and they say, look, I've been listening to what you've been saying for 6 months, and it's changed my life. It's like I was depressed, I was addicted to drugs, my relationships weren't working out, I was hopeless, I didn't have any goal. I started cleaning up my room and telling the truth and working hard on myself, and it's really working, and I just want to thank you for helping me. And I think, God, it's so sad that so many of these men, they've not had an encouraging bloody word, a real encouraging word in their entire life. It just takes a little bit of encouragement and care so that they're willing to set themselves straight to some degree and start trying. It's just a catastrophe that's so rare in their lives. And so, yeah, well, every time, because I see the same thing when I'm talking. My audiences are often composed mostly of men between, say, 20 and 35. Not exactly young, but young enough. And they're desperate for a discussion about responsibility and fair play and noble being and working properly in the world. And the idea, and to hear the idea that their lives actually matter, that if they straighten themselves up and fly right, that they'll have a beneficial effect on themselves and their family and the community, and that the world is starving for that. And for them as individuals, not for them as a group, but for each of them as individuals. So, yeah, it breaks me up. Every time the topic comes up, it breaks me up because it's so damn sad. And we're so stupid. We're alienating young men. We're telling them that they're patriarchal oppressors and denizens of rape culture and tyrants in waiting, and we fail to discriminate between their competence and their tyranny. And it's awful. It's so destructive. It's so unnecessary. And it's so sad. And so whenever I think about it, especially because of all that I've seen of it, it makes me sad, like deeply. It's so sad.
Why has it happened?
Oh, God, that's a complicated question. I mean, well, it's partly happened because every culture has a tyrannical element, I mean, our culture isn't perfect. There is oppressive elements to it. It's not completely fair. So some of it is just the age-old observation that you don't get a culture without a bit of a tyranny. A lot of it is resentment and failure to take responsibility. It's people saying, instead of looking at the part they play in making the world a dark and terrible place, they blame something like the patriarchy and then assume that all the men who compose it are somehow malevolent tyrants or tyrants in waiting. It's like it's ideological possession. There's just no excuse for it. It's motivated by resentment.
Does
mostly.
feminism have a role to play in that?
Well, it depends on how you define feminism. If it's the feminism that says, wouldn't it be lovely if women could offer what they have to the world so that the world would be a better place on the same footings as men? Well, no, that's great. If it's the feminism that says that Western culture is an evil, corrupt patriarchy, then absolutely. There's no excuse for that sort of thing, and it completely dominates the universities, especially in the humanities. Like, we really believe, most left-wing academics believe, that the Western culture is a corrupt patriarchal tyranny. I mean, God, wake up! Most governments in the world are run by thugs, absolute thugs. They'll kick in your door and kill you in your sleep. In the West, we have, well, a wonderful civilization. People are as free as they've ever been. You can live well here as an individual, and to consider that, a corrupt patriarchal tyranny, and to lay that at the feet of young men, and then to tell them that they have to be discriminated against because of the systemic, let's say, racism and misogyny of the past. It's appalling. And men are bailing out of universities at a rate. This is not my opinion. I've been tracking these statistics for 15 years. Men are bailing out of universities at a rate you just would not believe. There won't be a man left in the humanities in 15 years at this rate. All you have to do is look at the trends. It's quite obvious, and it's no wonder. So, and it's just appalling. And I've also been described as misogynist because, I've been trying to strengthen young men. It's like, of all the ridiculous ideas that strengthening young men is somehow misogynist. I mean, God, it's just, I can't even believe what you would have to think that that was a good idea.